The city of Athens, often hailed as the cradle of democracy, philosophy, and beauty, was also home to one of the most organized systems of human exploitation in the ancient world. Behind the marble facades and marble ideals, behind the voices of Socrates and the poets reciting hymns to virtue, there existed another Athens, one that thrived in the shadows. It was a city where freedom was celebrated in the assembly, but bought and sold in the marketplace, where the human form was sculpted into gods by day and desecrated by night. The brothels of Athens were not hidden. They were licensed businesses, their owners proudly paying taxes that contributed directly to the city's treasury. A man could stand in the agora, purchase a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and then a woman. The transaction was simple, efficient, and utterly dehumanizing. In some parts of the city, a night with a woman cost less than 2 barley flour. These women were called pornatha, root of the word pornography, a title that stripped them of individuality, reducing them to living merchandise in a system that prized profit above all else. Court speeches by orators like Lysias and Demosthenes revealed the grim arithmetic of their existence. A pawn might serve 6, 8, even 10 men a day. Her labor filled the pockets of her master, while she survived on whatever crumbs remained, perhaps enough to buy a handful of lentils or a rag to cover herself. No Athenian law set a minimum age for entering this trade. Girls as young as 10 or 11 were branded with hot iron on the thigh, a permanent scar announcing them as property. The mark was both punishment and proof, a symbol that her body was no longer her own. Inside these brothels, the air was heavy with smoke, sweat, and despair. Privacy did not exist. Women were arranged in large, dimly lit rooms, separated only by thin mats or filthy curtains. Every cry of pain, every whimper, became part of the background, a rhythm of suffering that entertained the waiting men. When a new girl arrived, the house marked the occasion with a cruel ritual. She would be violated publicly before the others, a spectacle meant to shatter her resistance. Those who refused to participate were beaten or starved until they complied. One account from Thessaly describes how the crowd would laugh and jeer during these rituals, calling it breaking the spirit, as if a living being were a wild horse to be tamed. In Athens, violence became a form of recreation. Vase paintings and graffiti recovered from ancient ruins depict scenes that blend amusement with atrocity, men drinking wine while women cry in the background, their agony transformed into decoration. Certain brothels even specialized in brutality. Some clients paid extra for the right to harm the women, to burn them with oil lamps, to slash their faces, to leave scars as proof of their dominance. Pain became a commodity, beauty a temporary investment. Owners categorized their slaves with chilling precision: Nubian, mute, resistant, obedient, unbroken. Each label carried a price, as if the human soul could be sorted like a merchant's inventory. A small woman fetched one price, a foreign one another. Even deformities had markets. There were men who sought out women with missing teeth, broken limbs, or burns. In 5th century Athens, cruelty was not just tolerated, it was monetized. Yet the darkest scenes unfolded during the city's sacred festivals. During the festival of Dionysia, when citizens celebrated the god of wine and theater, brothel women were handed to groups of men for free. It was called a sacred offering, a gift to the god. Drunken men dragged them through the streets to the sound of flutes, music echoing against the marble walls of temples. Bets were placed on how long a woman could endure. To outsiders, it looked like celebration. To those within, it was ritualized horror. Ancient writers recorded these acts without a hint of shame. Priests claimed they honored the gods through ecstasy and sacrifice, but what truly took place was closer to mass violation. The blood of women mixed with spilled wine. Their screams carried through the night as offerings for abundance and good harvests. Some died from internal injuries, others suffocated beneath the weight of the mob. Those who survived were dragged back to the brothel to resume their duty as though nothing had happened. When the festivals ended, the city returned to its polished normalcy. The philosophers resumed their debates. The artists returned to their studios, and the same men who had cheered at the temple would walk past the brothel the next morning without a glance, pretending not to hear the faint moans behind its doors. To live as a woman in these houses was to exist without a future. If she disobeyed, she was punished. If she obeyed, she was consumed. Every day blurred into the next, bruises layered over bruises, each one fading only to make room for another. Even her suffering was not private. It was a spectacle for others' amusement. What is most chilling is how normal it all was. This was not the work of madmen or criminals. It was sanctioned by law, upheld by religion, normalized by culture. The same city that celebrated the ideal of the human form in marble allowed real human bodies to be broken and sold in its alleys. And while philosophers like Plato and Aristotle wrote about virtue, beauty, and the nature of the soul, none wrote of the souls trapped just a few streets away, girls, branded, beaten, and silenced. In the heart of Athens, the city of wisdom, human suffering became invisible through familiarity. The cries of women blended with the music of festivals, their pain mistaken for background noise in a society that worshipped perfection but refused to see the cost of it. And so, the city that gave the world democracy built its glory on the bones of those who were never allowed a voice. In Athens, a woman inside the brothel was not a person. She was a living investment, something that could be punished, repaired, or discarded depending on her usefulness. To her owner, her pain had an accounting value. The whip, the branding iron, the locked room, they were all tools of management. Owners referred to beatings as character correction. A woman who cried too loudly, who refused a client, who dared to rest, might be stripped naked and tied to a post in the courtyard. There, she would be left through the winter night, shivering as the cold gnawed at her skin, or beneath the merciless summer sun, until her lips cracked and her body trembled from dehydration. When she fainted, a bucket of water brought her back so the punishment could continue. The brothel's walls were painted not with frescoes but with blood. Some masters kept wooden clubs, leather straps, even blunt knives, specifically for discipline. When a woman resisted, she was beaten until her body stopped moving. If she survived, she returned to work the next day. If not, her corpse was carried away at night. No one asked questions. In a city that worshipped order, this brutality was just another form of it. Runaway women were treated as thieves, for by fleeing they had stolen their own bodies from their owners. The law sided with the masters, declaring that property could not possess will. The punishment was public branding, mutilation, humiliation. Some were branded on the forehead, a permanent reminder of rebellion. Others were nailed to wooden planks and displayed in the city square. The executioners left them hanging there until thirst or infection finished the job. There are court records describing women who fled to temples, begging the gods for refuge. They fell at the feet of marble statues, clutching altars, hoping for divine mercy. But priests often took bribes to return them to their owners. The same temples where philosophers preached justice became markets of betrayal. The women were dragged away in chains, their blood staining the temple steps. At dawn, other slaves were forced to scrub the stains clean before prayers began. To the Athenian mind, a runaway prostitute was no different from a stolen horse or a lost coin. The law preserved the rights of the buyer, not the humanity of the bought. Philosophers argued about the nature of justice while ignoring the simple question of whether a woman deserved to own her own breath. But the body can only bear so much. Medical writings from the time, clinical, detached, describe symptoms of infection, disease, and exhaustion. Some women worked until their bones fractured from the strain. Others succumbed to fevers that burned for days before death. No physician visited them. Healing cost more than replacement. A new girl could be purchased for less than the price of a medical consultation. Archaeological excavations near the Athenian brothel district tell the rest of the story. Beneath layers of dust, historians have uncovered female skeletons bearing terrible signs, shattered pelvises from repeated assault, skulls cracked from blunt force, ribs that healed at odd angles after beatings, and vertebrae warped by years of labor. Many of these women died in their 20s. Their bones show no burial rites, no offerings, just bodies tossed into ditches outside the city walls, mingled with refuse and broken pottery. Among those remains, archaeologists found something else: tiny earrings, hairpins, fragments of jewelry worn by the enslaved, small details that whisper of who they were. A girl who once liked silver rather than gold, another who tied her hair with string because she could not afford a ribbon. Their owners erased their names, but not these traces of personality that somehow survived the centuries. Even the brothel owners themselves were part of a vicious hierarchy. Above them stood wealthy patrons and city officials who taxed the trade, ensuring the profits flowed upward. The Athenian treasury recorded steady revenue from prostitution, a fact proudly mentioned in financial accounts as evidence of the city's prosperity. The suffering of women literally funded democracy. Every public speech in the agora, every festival at the Acropolis, every marble block of the Parthenon gleamed faintly with the price of their agony. Athenian justice prided itself on rationality, yet it found endless ways to rationalize cruelty. The courts declared that a woman's silence was obedience, her screams were insolence. If she endured, she was useful. If she collapsed, she was waste. Even her death was measured for efficiency. A body that could no longer earn money was hauled beyond the city limits, abandoned in ravines or shallow pits where wild dogs would finish what human greed had begun. For the few who lived long enough, aging was another punishment. A woman past her youth earned less. Her decline was met not with pity but with contempt. Some were sold to smaller, poorer brothels, others forced into manual labor, carrying water or cleaning streets. The same city that revered the beauty of Aphrodite mocked the women who once served its desires. And yet, amid this abyss, there were whispers of defiance. A few women sang softly to themselves while working, their voices trembling in the dark. Some carved marks into the walls, names, symbols, perhaps prayers. In one ruin, archaeologists found the faint letter Iro, likely short for Erinea, meaning irony. Perhaps it was her name. Perhaps it was her message to the gods. Either way, it remains, carved into stone, refusing to disappear. For every philosopher who spoke of virtue, there were 100 unnamed women whose suffering gave Athens its comfort. They were invisible to history but essential to its glory. Their bodies were temples of pain upon which the city built its civilization. And when they were gone, Athens remembered them only as statistics, never as souls. In the Athenian brothels, even the possibility of motherhood was treated as a threat to profit. A pregnancy meant lost revenue, and a child was a liability. To the owners, a woman's womb was merely a tool, useful only when it could be controlled. The moment it disobeyed, it became a crime. Ancient physicians wrote recipes for preventive measures, though their language concealed horror. Women were forced to drink mixtures of crushed metals, poisonous herbs like pennyroyal or animal bile. If these concoctions failed, violence followed. They were beaten in the abdomen, forced to jump from heights, or made to carry heavy loads until their bodies gave out. Abortion was not a choice, it was an order. The instruments were crude, sharpened sticks, fragments of bone, or hot oil poured directly into the womb. There was no anesthesia, no mercy, and no concern for survival. A girl who died during the procedure was replaced by another the same week. If pregnancy could not be prevented, birth happened wherever there was space on the same filthy straw where customers had been entertained hours before. No midwives attended. The other women, themselves terrified, tried to help, tearing old rags for bandages. The room smelled of sweat, iron, and blood. Some women bled to death within minutes. Others survived only to face their newborns' immediate disposal. Archaeologists have found infant bones in the drainage channels and trash heaps behind these brothels, tiny skeletons, tangled among shards of pottery and animal remains. To the men who owned them, these babies were waste, like broken tools or spoiled grain. Female infants were the most likely to be killed, considered doubly worthless, unwanted as heirs, unsellable as slaves for years to come. Male babies sometimes lived long enough to be sold to distant households, though most never saw their first sunrise. There are grim indications that some women, heartbroken, powerless, ended their newborns' lives themselves, whispering prayers to distant gods that their children might be spared the life they knew too well. In those moments, infanticide was not cruelty, it was mercy. Athenian law was clear. A woman enslaved in a brothel possessed no rights, no legal personhood. Her testimony in court was meaningless unless verified through torture, a process the law called bismonos, the touchstone of truth. Ironically, in a society that glorified rational debate, truth itself was measured in pain. To speak, a woman had to bleed. If she dared accuse a free man of harm, her body became evidence through suffering, her words accepted only when extracted under agony. Debt ensured that none could escape. The owners recorded every meal, every rag of clothing, every breath of air as a loan to be repaid. The ledger never ended. Interest compounded daily. Fines appeared without explanation. A woman could serve hundreds of clients, earn thousands of drachmas for her master, and still be told she owed him more than the day she arrived. Freedom was a mirage dangled in front of her eyes, used to keep her compliant. Even when her body broke beyond use, the debt remained proof. Her owner claimed that she had failed to work hard enough. In this world, consent was a foreign concept. The word itself did not exist in the legal vocabulary of Athens. A slave could not refuse. Her silence meant obedience. Her resistance meant disobedience. The system was airtight, self-justifying. Those who profited called it order, and those who suffered called it fate. Still, the ancient texts reveal moments when women tried to resist in whatever small ways they could. Some refused to eat, starving themselves to escape by death. Others mutilated their own faces, scarring the features that drew men's attention. There were even rare whispers of revolt women who set fire to their brothels or poisoned their masters. The records of such events are fragmentary, written only by men who condemned them as madness. But to the women themselves, madness might have felt like the last form of freedom. Medical writings, clinical and cold, show that few of these women survived beyond their chronic infections, untreated wounds, malnutrition, and exhaustion slowly eroded their bodies. Yet they were forced to continue working long after their health collapsed. Complaints about smell or illness were met not with care, but with the whip. One master reportedly said, "Pain brings back color to pale flesh." He meant it literally, beatings that forced the blood to the surface, a grotesque illusion of vitality. The most terrifying aspect of all was how society accepted it. The same city that built the Parthenon, debated ethics, and worshipped Athena as a goddess of wisdom, saw nothing immoral in this. Philosophers spoke of virtue and justice, yet none applied those ideals to the women who kept their economy alive. The law that protected merchants, sculptors, and soldiers offered no such courtesy to the enslaved. If Athens was the beacon of civilization, then its light was fueled by human suffering. For every philosopher's scroll, there was a woman bleeding in silence. For every marble statue of beauty, there was a body hidden beneath the earth, unmarked and unnamed. And still, the city thrived, its citizens proud of their democracy, unaware or unwilling to see that half its foundation rested on the unending exploitation of those who would never be allowed to speak. For a few women, fortune offered a cruel mirage of escape. A handful were lifted from the common brothel to become hetairai, high-class courtesans trained in music, poetry, and conversation. To outsiders, they seemed privileged, dressed in silks instead of coarse linen, adorned with jewelry, entertained in private chambers rather than public rooms, but their freedom was an illusion gilded with gold. Their value still depended entirely on the whim of a man. A patron's affection could vanish overnight, and with it, everything silks replaced by rags, perfumed rooms by dark cellars. A favorite might be loaned to a friend as a gesture of hospitality, or beaten to death for showing hesitation. A woman's worth in Athens rose and fell with the flick of a wrist, as easily as a coin tossed onto a table. The city's artistic brilliance only deepened the irony. In workshops not far from the brothels, sculptors carved goddesses in marble: Athena, Aphrodite, Demeter, each embodying purity, wisdom, and love. But the living women of Athens, made of flesh instead of stone, were denied all three. Their suffering financed the same art that celebrated beauty. Even the Parthenon's gleaming marble was funded in part by taxes from the sex trade. The grandeur of Greek civilization, its philosophy and drama, was inseparable from this economy of exploitation. Democracy flourished because someone else paid for it in blood. With age, a woman's body became her death sentence. When her beauty faded, she was no longer profitable. Some were sold to smaller taverns, others simply abandoned beyond the city walls. There, their bodies joined countless others' bones piled in forgotten ravines. No funerals, no grave markers, no offerings. In a culture obsessed with honoring the dead, these women were denied even a name. Their erasure was deliberate. The silence around them was not absence, it was policy. Even in life, Athens mocked their existence. Comic playwrights like Aristophanes portrayed prostitutes as crude and laughable, their pain transformed into punchlines. In the open-air theaters of Dionysus, the crowd roared with laughter at scenes of assault and humiliation, staged as comedy. Men who applauded these plays might have visited brothels the same night, seeing no contradiction. The suffering of women became entertainment, their humanity turned into metaphor. In domestic life, painted pottery depicted similar scenes: drunken revelers taunting naked women, acts of violence rendered as decoration. To dine in Athens was to drink wine from a cup adorned with a woman's despair. Historians later called this the brilliance of Greek theatre, but its brilliance was built upon a blindness so profound it became culture. The Athenian elite praised tragedy as the art of empathy, stories of kings who suffered and fell, but never considered the tragedies happening a few streets away, in the dim courtyards of their own city. For them, true tragedy was reserved for noblemen, not enslaved women. Even literature preserved the hierarchy. Poets wrote verses comparing women's tears to the morning dew, their cries to music. The metaphor was beautiful. The reality was unbearable. The more eloquently Athens described suffering, the more efficiently it ignored the real thing. And so, the women disappeared not in a single moment, but gradually, erased by centuries of reverence for their oppressors. Modern textbooks still speak of Athens as the birthplace of democracy, yet rarely mention the tens of thousands of women who lived and died in bondage to sustain it. Tourists walk through the ruins today, marveling at the stones of the Parthenon, unaware that those stones were cleaned and carried by enslaved hands, their shine paid for by pain. The same streets where philosophers debated ethics once echoed with the footsteps of chained girls being marched to their masters. Yet history leaves traces. Beneath the temples, archaeologists have found brothel foundations, fragments of pottery marked with obscene inscriptions, bones scarred by violence. They are mute, but they speak a truth Athens refused to. The empire of ideals was built on silence. If you listen closely among the ruins, you might still hear it's the whisper of those whose names were never carved in stone. They ask no vengeance, only remembrance. Their story is not just of cruelty, but of survival, of women who endured the unendurable, whose existence challenges the perfection Athens claimed for itself. The next time someone praises the wisdom of the ancients, remember the women who lived unseen beneath their marble gods. Remember that the price of greatness was often paid by those denied even the right to be remembered. Because civilization, for all its monuments, is judged not by the beauty of its temples, but by the shadows they cast.